We were woken this morning here by loud explosions. Is it your view that the Russians are intent on taking this city and removing President Zelensky from power?
It's definitely our view that the Russians intend to invade the whole of Ukraine. The nonsense they were spouting about the Donbass, and it were, as ever, with a whole series of dishonest claims, are not the case, and that's why you've seen a number of columns of Russian army entering the city from the south, from the north, from Belarus even, and indeed from the separatist region. But our assessment as of this morning is that Russia has not taken any of its major objectives. In fact, it is behind its hoped-for timetable. They've lost over 450 personnel. And indeed, as you've said on your report, one of the significant airports they were trying to capture with their elite Spetsnaz has failed to be taken. And in fact, the Ukrainians have taken it back. So I think, contrary to great Russian claims, and indeed President Putin's sort of vision that somehow the Ukrainians would be liberated and would be flocking to his cause, he's got that completely wrong. And the Russian army has failed to deliver on day one its main objective.
Even so, I mean, the explosions this morning are getting closer. We're told Russian forces are making their way here, albeit with some resistance. If they do topple this government, do you accept that the West has failed Ukraine?
Well, what I have said all along is that Ukraine needs its support and allies. The United Kingdom, Sweden, for example, Canada, and a number of other countries have stood side by side with Ukraine since 2014. We had Operation Orbital to help set up and train. We trained over 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers. We were the first country to deploy lethal aid to help the Ukrainians in Europe alongside the United States. And now we're joined by 4 or 5 other European countries, I'm pleased to say. But, the person who has failed to live up to all his agreements, including the agreements that he has signed as lately as 2010, or certainly the Russian Federation, has been President Putin. He's failed to follow international law. He's failed to respect human rights and democracy.
But with respect, with respect, I mean, the West has failed to persuade President Putin that the price of invasion is too high.
I wrote an article in January that President Putin was beyond this type of persuasion. President Putin, I said, and got criticized at the time, there was a whiff of Munich about President Putin, and it wasn't about the bit about appeasement I was referring to. I was referring that in the Munich in 1938, Adolf Hitler all along had a plan to invade parts of Europe, and all the diplomacy was about a straw man sort of attempt by him to buy time. Putin has been set on this for many, many months and certainly over a year. And I think that's why, it doesn't matter how much effort we made, and we all made unbelievable amounts of effort. We saw President Macron go, with my Prime Minister, regularly spoke to Putin. Didn't matter. As we're seeing today, it's not about the Donbass, it's not about a minority, it is about a greed to subsume Ukraine into the Russian Federation, or indeed for President Putin to land grab in a way he modeled himself.
Right, but if you saw it coming a year ago, months ago, shouldn't the West and NATO have been more prepared for this? Let me just read you what President Zelensky, who is in this city, we think somewhere, probably in his bunker somewhere, let me read you what he said this morning. He said, "We are defending our state alone. Like yesterday, the world's most powerful forces are watching from afar." As a military man, how does that make you feel?
Well, what it makes me feel is the same thing that many, many people in the West felt, which was what you are seeing on your cameras today is illogical. President Putin didn't need to do this. He didn't need to occupy, which he's doing right now, a sovereign country. None of it stacked up. None of the reasons why he would do it would stack up. A few of us felt that, again, I made a few comments the other day about President Putin. He's not doing something that's logical. He's doing something that is about his ego and his legacy. So, the West will act in accordance.
Sorry, I'm talking about the West, though, Mr. Wallace. I'm talking about the West's response. Regardless of any NATO articles or rules, is there not a moral responsibility on the West to protect a democratic state from a paranoid autocratic dictator. Isn't that just basic humanity, and isn't that a moral mission?
Well, it absolutely is a moral mission, which is why we have taken the step of some of the toughest sanctions to be placed on Russia are going in now.
It's not working. He's not working. The shells are coming in. The missiles are coming in.
Hang on. As you say, President. Okay. So there are two other options, Mark. Which is, if you think President Putin is absolutely, irrational, tyrant, etc., and all those things that you have just said, which many of us do think he is in a position that is beyond logic, beyond respect of other sovereign countries, there are a number of ways to stop him or make it cost him. One is sanctions. One is to help the Ukrainians defend themselves, which is lethal aid, which we did alongside the United States quite early on, and training. We announced over a year ago that we would be selling ships to Ukraine with missiles that would allow them to defend their ports. We have done a lot. The third option, which is the option that I've been quite open about,
just to interrupt on that one, how are you going to get any more military aid into this country if it is controlled by the Russians? They will control the airspace, they will control the borders, and they will control the sea borders. How do you get any more military help to help this? It's not going to happen, is it?
Well, I'm not going to tell you, with all due respect, how we're going to do these things, because that would put at risk the lives of the people that we are supporting, and indeed, other people. So look, what I would say is...
So the military could come in? So we could have the military coming in?
No, I didn't say military. I said we could support. I didn't say the military. Stop jumping to lots of things. I said it is perfectly possible on a country that is the size of Germany and France put together with 44 million people. Russia does not control the whole of Ukraine at all. Russia, as I said this morning, has failed in its day one objectives. Russia, with its Spetsnaz, its so-called elite, hasn't even been able to take an airport that it took yesterday. Russia has lost significant amounts of armour and people. The Ukrainians are fighting, and they are fighting brave. It is perfectly possible for countries around Europe and the world, in fact, I do agree with you, it is their moral duty to help the Ukraine. It is perfectly possible to continue to support Ukraine as we speak, as you are standing in Kiev, to make sure that we give them all the aid, whether it is non-lethal aid or, where possible, it is defensive lethal aid, to help them defend themselves. That is possible. Ukraine has a lot of fight in it. You've seen that over the night. President Putin is not getting it the way he wishes it to do, and he's currently got forces that far outnumber Ukraine. But it is possible. But I'm afraid I'm not going to go on national television and describe how we will help Ukraine, because to do that in a war-footing scenario is to put people at risk.
Right. OK. This is an unprovoked and completely unjustifiable attack on a democratic nation. Does that, in your view, amount to a war crime?
Well, it certainly amounts to a breach of international law in anyone's definition. And what happens on the ground is the responsibility of the Russian Federation. We summoned the defence attaché to the Ministry of Defence yesterday. I made sure he was reminded of his obligations under the Geneva Convention. The track record of Russians in places like Chechnya is not good. But nevertheless, those commanders, whether they are senior or junior, will be held responsible. And in this day and age, the good news is we know who they are, and we can find out who they are should they commit war crimes. And we will pursue them no matter what happens in Ukraine. The West will pursue them. The United Kingdom will pursue them. And President Putin, who has done this, he has to fail. Whether he fails militarily or whether he fails for the rest of his reign, so to speak, in Ukraine, he has to fail. He has to fail because he is fighting our values, and he is fighting all the human rights that we stand for. And I don't know whether he'll fail in Ukraine. We will do everything we can to make sure he does. But if he doesn't, he needs to fail after that.
If you are going to track these people down and you're going to hold them to account, does that mean we will see President Putin in a war crimes court? Is that what you would like to see? And do you think that will ever happen?
If President Putin commits a war crime, then just as I do, if I were to commit a war crime, I should expect to be held to account. But, what we're saying at the moment
Isn't this already a war crime?
Well, I'm not, I'm afraid, an international lawyer. I couldn't tell you the difference between breaking international law insofar as directing your forces to invade another country versus a war crime, e.g. things like genocide and indeed, torture and etc. So I wouldn't want to speculate the differences. What I would say is he's clearly broken international law. He's occupying or trying to occupy a sovereign country who made one mistake. In his eyes, their mistake in his eyes was not to choose the Kremlin as a way for their future. And that's all they have done. And as we see on our telly, President Putin's response to that is ultimate force, destruction, lots of civilian areas bombed. And we must all never forget that.
OK, and just finally, are you more convinced now than ever that Putin has gone full Tonto, as you put it, that he's irrational, lost his mind?
I certainly think what he is doing is deeply irrational. I certainly think he has gone full Tonto, if that's what what I said the other day and talking to some soldiers. No one else in their right mind would do what we are seeing on our telly screens today. No one else would impose their will on another sovereign country with all sorts of concocted conspiracies and very bizarre readings of history, unless somehow they were acting deeply irrationally. But that's no comfort to the people of Kiev. I spoke to my defence counterpart only a few minutes ago, and we spoke to them last night, myself and the Foreign Secretary. Our Prime Minister is going to speak to President Zelensky, and we will keep on going, supporting the people of Ukraine.